Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of RE206, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called In a Crime-Infested Galaxy, a tomb robber and a professor hope to find a cure for a deadly disease, written by AntiMoneySquandering. The man looked small in the center of the room, standing in an ornately carved dais of unintelligible lines and swirls. His spacesuit was fitted close to his body, a dull black material, but a form of exoskeleton was adhered to the outside. The thin metallic structure emanated from his mid-back to down the back of his calves, culminating in a pair of high-tech boots. This contraption held him upright as he stared at the crystalline table in front of him. An uneven diamond that was laced through with similar symbols as that which surrounded him. He reached out with one gloved hand, letting his fingers gently trace over the indentations that littered the surface. "They're meant to be here," he announced, his voice artificial and devoid of emotion the words conveyed. "Gods no, all my research all these years, they were meant to be here." His servos vibrated as the exoskeleton lessened slightly, allowing him to take a seat in mid-air. Their customary quiet whine was louder in the alien cavern, and he swung his helmet gaze around once more in desperation. There were side rooms, or at least the suggestion of such, covered by rubble or worse. He moved to rub his brow ineffectively through his suit. "It'll take weeks." A beeping noise roused him from his despair, and he looked up to the machine that hovered just above him, its body a gleaming silver. It resembled a large disk with a cylinder atop, and from the cylinder its optic unit emerged, like a miniature telescope. This was pointed at one of the obstructed rooms, and the man stood straight once more, as the machine's beeping became more insistent. All of a sudden, the machine flew down closer to him, hovering just above his shoulder, like a protecting hawk. As there was a slight blurring of light, and where once there was rubble, there now stood a gaping entrance and a large humanoid figure. If it weren't for the exoskeleton, he might have fallen to the ground in shock. "Okay, buddy," the figure announced, taking a few steps forward. Their own suit was far more bulky, serving as armor as much as life support. "Let's not do anything rash." "Stay where you are," the man yelled out, grateful for the now emotion-stripping nature of his suit mask. There was atmosphere enough in the cavern that his words would carry, though the gases present were not conducive to human life. He was grateful for that, also, as he could feel the sweat collecting inside of his suit. "Or I'll instruct it to open fire." The figure paused, its large helmet swinging from the man to the machine by him. He breathed out a gasp of relief when he heard the booming laugh of the figure echo out in the chamber. "That, I've seen plenty of those around, mate, and not one of them had a military application. Maybe some small-scale lasers for excavation, sure, but not a gun like this." They continued to walk towards him now, hefting their own rifle that the man had failed to see initially in the gloom. It was an ugly thing, short and bulky. The figure walked right up to the man, standing slightly taller than him, and used the barrel of the weapon to tap on the scope of his machine. He winced. "Yeah, and that thing there, which I think you intended to make me think was a gun, well, that's a flashlight, ain't it?" He breathed out, nodding, allowing his gaze to look at the stranger in greater detail. Their gear certainly had a military bent and was born, none of it uniform. "A mercenary," the man exhaled, allowing his exo to relax once more into a half-crouch. "Of sorts," the figure replied, nonplussed at his statement. "One of the finest tomb robbers in this portion of the galaxy, to be more exact." The man laid his hands on his legs, his gaze alternating between their weapon and their inscrutable faceplate, an obscured dark black unlike his. "This is not a tomb," he said, partly due to a lifetime of correcting people, partly because he did not know what else to say. The mercenaries swung their head around theatrically, looking at the barren space they stood within. "Well, there ain't fecking much alive down here, is there, mate? Except for you. And if we want to keep it that way, you just sit there all awkward-like while I get out of here." The figure paused for a couple seconds, as if the man would complain or retort. When he stayed silent, the mercenary gave him a curt nod and strode off. As they walked past, he noticed a small anti-grav slit being pulled along behind them, attached by a cord around their waist. There was a mound of items on the slit, most obscured by the canvas. One, however, had rolled slightly free, and he could just make out telltale glint. "Wait! You can't!" he shouted, arm outstretched as if he could stop them by sheer force of will alone. He snatched the hand back to his chest quickly when the mercenary spun around, the gun now up and aimed at his chest. "Very dangerous telling a woman she can't do something," the figure growled. "Now just wait here all quiet-like, or I'll be forced to return the living number in this tomb to 0 again." "It's not a tomb," the man repeated, cursing himself internally as he did so, as the gun aimed at him twitched slightly. "Sorry, but you don't know what you have there." "Oh? Now that's a very presumptuous, but you know the best thing about my profession? Most of the time it doesn't matter. You can always find a buyer, especially for some Xeno gems." "They're keys," he blurted out, and the mercenary lowered her gun in surprise. The man looked back at the alien table behind and then back, the words flowing out fast now. "For the lock behind me, they're why I'm here. I'm a professor of xenoarchaeology at Rosenpoldasky University. Or at least I was. But you have no idea what we have here. I've spent nearly my whole life discerning all the findings and artifacts from the first sentience that I could, and they've led me here." The mercenary looked backwards briefly to the opening that led back to the surface and presumably her ship. She shook her head and looked back at the professor, her rifle now aimed at the ground. "So, FS Tech. Well, thanks, Prof. That'll add a few more zeros onto the asking price of these babies. Now, if you're done..." "I can use them to open the lock. It's below us, a trove of first-century treasures, the likes of which you've never seen. Even a sliver of it would be priceless." "Well, priceless can be a problem sometimes," she said, but sheathed her gun on a mag clip on her thigh. "What's your angle here? You open the tomb for me and we split? Is that your plan?" "It's not a tomb," the professor answered automatically, missing the mercenary's annoyed grunt as he turned back to the table behind him. "It's a facility, a medical facility if I'm correct. What is down there would revolutionize the galaxy as we know it. And if you brought it back to a government, or one of the families and sold it, patented it, whatever, you'd be one of the richest souls in the light years around." The mercenary walked around until she was opposite the professor, the crystalline table now between them. She reached out an arm at hand and ran it over the structure before leaning on it with both hands, her masked face aimed towards him. "Well, that sounds swell, Prof, but I still don't see what you're getting out of this, or why I should care, given I could just force you to open the facility." The professor stood up straighter, waving his hand as if to indicate that that was not a concern. "I just need to understand the technology. Well, what I can actually need is to utilize the archaeo tech, but to do that, I need to understand it first. It'll take you a long time to extract what you need. Just leave me down here, let me research it, let me use it, and then you can have everything." The mercenary stood up, her head tilted slightly as she walked back around, her gaze pointedly taking in the form of the professor. "Ah, now I see the angle," she said, her voice somehow softer now, even though her helmet's deep speakers. "Something down there that can give you your legs back." The professor went to speak, then stopped, looking down at his mechanically aided legs as if he'd forgotten that they were there. He slapped a part of the metal and looked back up, shaking his head. "No. Well, yes, technically, but that's not why it's not what I want." "You don't want your legs back?" "Well, yes, of course I do, but..." "Who is it?" The mercenary said it with such a surety that the professor didn't even bother to try and deny it. He turned his attention back to the table. "My, daughter. She has rapid organ atrophy disease." "She's walking the road," the mercenary said quietly, and the professor cringed slightly at the expression. It had come into popularity as more people succumbed to the illness, though it did not seem to be infectious. It was, however, currently fatal in 100% of cases. So a sufferer of the disease, once diagnosed, began a short walk down the road to death. "I have her in stasis," he said, ignoring the whistle and the admission, "but I don't know for how much longer it's..." "Ludicrously expensive, yeah, I know, Prof." The mercenary paused, looking to the canvas that held her loot and back to the table. "And you think we can actually find a cure for the road down there?" To use the word "we" was not lost on the man, and even in his sealed environment, he suddenly found it hard to breathe for a moment. His helmet was semi-transparent, so even though he couldn't speak, the mercenary still turned away at the sight of the few tears that had escaped. Yeah, I'm a tomb robber, not a heartless android. She walked to the sled, patting the gun holstered to her waist. This works best as a deterrent, you know. Though most times I never see another soul in these places. She hauled the sled over easily and lifted the covering, revealing the 6 crystal-like objects beneath. Each was carved intricately and identically, and she lifted each one carefully before laying it out on the table before them. She looked at each of them with varying indentations before giving up and tapping the professor on the shoulder. So what now, Prof? You're the brains, I'm the brawn. These all look the bloody same to me. They would, he responded, not even looking at the artifacts as his machine buzzed down closer, allowing him to fiddle with the hidden control panel. There should be no discernible difference to the human eye. The machine turned its scope on 6 crystals, and the screen slid down from below the flat body, showing live feed of its camera. But that does not mean that there is no difference. Our spectrum of visible light is marginal, even amongst the wider animal kingdom. Many can see ultraviolet, beyond violet, as it were, and machines, well, they can be designed to see further still. He gestured to the screen, and despite herself, the mercenary moved in eagerly to see each crystal lined up in a different radiant color. She let out a short breath before composing herself. Okay, so pretty light show, what now? The table isn't glowing. No, it's not, the professor said, already reaching out and carefully slotting crystals into some pattern only he could discern. But those spirals and symbols are the key. You can read those, she said, looking closer at the mad scramble of lines and curves that surrounded the crystals. I can make educated guesses, very educated guesses. An hour passed as the professor carried out his assumptions. In addition to the correct crystal being slotted in its allotted place, the markings had denoted specific depths for each that had to be adhered to in order to function. The mercenary had mostly left him to it after realizing it was not a matter of simply throwing the right one in the right hole. I've heard the road described as an incredibly aggressive form of supercancer, she said suddenly, from where she leaned on one corner of the table. I guess that is accurate, the professor responded, preoccupied. So how do you cure that? Because we found out years ago there is no cure for cancer. It's the cells dying, not a disease you can fix with medicine. That is accurate too, so what? I mean, we might well find something to fix your legs. Are you hoping to extrapolate off of that, improve on some FS tech? Very confident in your skills there, Prof. The professor paused, the last crystal in his hand, and stood up a bit straighter, feeling its weight. No, he said finally. It's not that kind of medical facility. I'll use myself as a guinea pig if needs be, but the process would not be different for her than me. The mercenary waited, drumming her fingers on the table, before sighing pointedly. The professor laid the crystal down and remained silent for a few more moments. The mercenary didn't push him, sensing that this time he was simply collecting his words rather than being reticent to tell her. The machine he had with him flew down and gently bumped his shoulder, as if providing comfort, and he reached down and patted it. She frowned behind a mask. That behavior needed to be programmed into such a contraption. There is no cure for rapid organ atrophy disease. The tomb robber snapped a hand on her helm. A ringing sound. Yes, Professor Obvious, we've covered that. That's why you're looking at FS Tech. No, you don't understand. There is no cure, as in, it cannot be cured. It is a failure of the body, and it is irreversible. First sentient technology may help slow it, but even that will not be able to synthesize a cure. It won. Then what are we here for? To give her a bit longer? No. What we find, I truly believe that it'll give my daughter back. Prof, if you don't start making sense, I'm going to shoot you and just take my chances with the final bit of the key. The professor ignored her, chuckling softly and lifting the crystal once more. Oh, this is just that, a key. Once below, we'll have to circumvent some more actual security measures. Think of the money. Just think of the money, the mercenary whispered to herself, her eyes pressed tightly shut behind her obscured visor. She opened them and pointed a finger at the man. What is down there? In short, a cloning facility. A what? My research suggests that this is where one of the few cloning facilities lies, and not just cloning in the way that we have it now, where you can replicate an organ or to transplant, actual consciousness transplantation to a new artificial body. He was becoming animated now, waving his hands and crystal around as he spoke. See, my daughter will die. That I have come to realize. Her body once afflicted has no chance of recovery. So in order for her to live again, her old body must die, and I must give her a new one. Silence reigned in the cabin for a long period, the professor doing some final study on the last key, the tomb robber trying to digest what was said. She looked up at the metal machine hovering silently, as if that would hold any answers. I can't. How would you even do that? And their biology. What little we know, surely it's not compatible. How would you change? I have suspicions that it is, the professor mumbled as he worked. Enough, anyway. Enough to create a suitable host body. He paused, the final crystal held within his gloved hand, and looked up at the mercenary. You might want to hold on to something. Why? Because if I finally worked out this last... He reached forward and slotted the crystal precisely into place, aided by his machine shining out measurements. There was a loud click, almost deafening, in the cabin, and the whole intricately carved dais they stood upon suddenly and unbelievably smoothly began to move down through the floor and further into the core of the planet. We're about to go where no human has ever gone, he yelled, as they descended the walls lit by some unseen force, some having transparent sections that showed large darkened swaths of corridors within. Isn't it exciting? Sure, Prof, the mercenary replied more quietly, her hand reaching down to grip the butt of a gun. Exciting. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters. Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.